She thought the company was hers the moment I handed her the keys. That's the image I keep coming back to, my son's wife, standing in the doorway of my office, the one I'd built from a single rented desk 31 years ago, holding those keys in her palm like she'd already decided where everything would go. She smiled at me, not the smile of someone grateful, the smile of someone who'd been waiting a very long time. I should back up. My name is Gerald. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my adult life, I ran a mid-sized commercial printing company out of Dayton, Ohio. Nothing glamorous. Reprinted menus, catalogs, packaging inserts, the kind of stuff nobody thinks about until it's missing. At our peak, we had 41 employees and 3 presses running 2 shifts. I started it the year my son was born, which I always thought was fitting. 2 things I built from nothing at the same time. My wife, Patricia, worked alongside me for 22 of those years. She handled the books, managed vendor relationships, kept the whole operation from flying apart during the years when we were barely breaking even. She passed 4 years ago, January, from a stroke that came without warning. We were eating breakfast. She set down her fork and was gone before the ambulance arrived. After that, the company became something different to me. Not a business. More like a monument. Every time I walked through the front door, I could feel her in there. In the filing system she designed, in the coffee machine she picked out, in the way the light came through the east windows in the morning. I kept going in because I didn't know how to stop. My son Nathan had been working with me for about 6 years by then. He was good with clients, good with sales, less good with the operational side, but I figured that would come with time. He'd married a woman named, I'll call her what she asked everyone to call her, Viveka. She'd come from money, or what passes for money in certain circles, and she had opinions about everything. The square footage of their house, the right neighborhood for their daughter to grow up in, and eventually, the right way to run my company. I didn't dislike her at first. She was sharp, organized. She had ideas about modernizing the client interface, moving to digital quoting, things I'd been slow to adopt. I gave her credit for that. But there was something underneath the helpfulness that I couldn't name for a long time. It felt like renovation, like she was always measuring walls. About 2 years after Patricia died, Nathan came to me and said he wanted to take over more of the day-to-day. He was 41. I understood the ask. I told him yes. Let's plan a transition. Let's do this right. What I imagined was a gradual handoff, a year, maybe 18 months, with me stepping back slowly while he got comfortable with the vendor contracts and the equipment leases and the pension obligations for the long-term employees. What happened instead was different. It started small. Nathan began CCing Viveka on internal emails, then she started showing up to vendor meetings. Then one Monday I came in and found that my parking spot, the one by the side door that I'd used since 1994, had a cone in it and a note that said the space was being reconfigured. Nobody had told me. When I asked Nathan about it, he laughed and said it was temporary. It wasn't. By spring, she had a desk in the main office. By summer, she was handling payroll. I told myself it was fine, that Nathan trusted her, that she was capable. I watched her reorganize the storage system that Patricia had designed, and I said nothing. I signed the papers that gave Nathan 60% of the operating shares because he was my son and I believed in his future, and I told myself Patricia would have wanted that. I was 66. I was tired. Grief does something to your judgment that you don't fully understand until later. The conversation happened on a Tuesday in October. Nathan asked me to come in early. Said he wanted to talk about the next chapter, his phrase. I drove in through the fog, parked on the street since my spot was long gone, made myself a coffee in the break room. He was waiting in the conference room with Viveka beside him, which I hadn't expected. There was a folder on the table. He said they'd consulted with a business attorney. He said the company needed clear leadership, a unified direction, and that having 2 principals with decision-making authority was creating, and I remember this word exactly, friction. He said it was time for me to step back completely. I asked him what that meant. He slid the folder across the table. Viveka had her hands folded in her lap. The folder contained a buyout offer. Not a generous one. It was based on a valuation that somehow reflected none of the goodwill we'd built, none of the client relationships, just the hard assets, equipment, accounts receivable. Real estate at a deflated number. I looked at the number. Then I looked at my son. He said, "Dad, you've been coasting for 2 years. Everybody sees it. It's time." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was looking at the window behind him. The east windows, the ones Patricia loved. And I was thinking about 31 years. I was thinking about the week we almost lost everything in 2008, and I worked 18-hour days for 4 months straight. I was thinking about the night one of the presses caught a small fire and I stayed until 4 in the morning to make sure every employee's shift was covered the next day. Coasting. I signed nothing. I stood up, said I needed time to review it with my own attorney, and I walked out. I sat in my car for a long time before I drove home. What happened over the next 6 weeks, I can only describe as a slow erasure. My keycard access was downgraded. I found out when I tried to enter the server room. My email was migrated to a read-only account. 3 of the senior employees I'd hired and worked with for over a decade stopped returning my calls. Later, I found out they'd been told I was transitioning out and that communication should go through Nathan. One of them, a press operator named, I'll just call him my old friend, told me months later that Viveka had pulled him aside and said I was having memory issues, that I wasn't to be trusted with operational decisions. Memory issues. I have a better memory than anyone in that building. I tried to talk to Nathan twice more. The first time he was patient, but firm. The second time, Viveka was present and she did most of the talking. She said they had the company's best interests at heart. She said change was hard but necessary. She said the offer was fair and that I should take it before the valuation changed. The way she said that last part, before the valuation changed, stayed with me for a long time afterward. The night before Thanksgiving, I drove to the office after hours. I still had a key to the side entrance, the one they'd missed when they updated the system. I wasn't there to take anything. I just wanted to walk through the place one more time, alone, before I made any decisions. I stood in the press room in the dark, listening to the building settle, and I thought about Patricia. I thought about what she would say. She would say, "You didn't read the partnership agreement carefully enough." She would be right. Here is what Nathan and Viveka did not know, and what I had nearly forgotten myself. When I established the operating structure of the company 8 years earlier with the help of an attorney named Hargrove, old, meticulous, a man who never missed anything, I had included a clause, a silent clause, buried in the shareholder agreement that I'd put there at Hargrove's suggestion after a client of his lost his business to a family dispute. The clause stated that in the event of any attempt to remove the founding shareholder from active participation without a unanimous board resolution, which required my vote, all transferred shares would revert to a holding entity. A holding entity I controlled. Nathan owned 60% of the operating shares. I owned 100% of the holding company that the business sat inside. I had not thought about this clause in years. Hargrove had died in 2019. His firm had dissolved. The paperwork was in a fireproof box in my basement, under a stack of Patricia's old recipe binders exactly where I'd put it in 2017 and not touched since. I drove home that night and I found the box. I read the clause 3 times. Then I called a business litigation attorney the next morning, a woman named. I found her through a referral from my accountant, and I drove to her office the Friday after Thanksgiving with the original documents in a manila envelope. She read through everything slowly. She asked me a few questions. Then she sat back and said, "Mr. Gerald, do you understand what you have here?" I told her I thought I did. She said they triggered this clause the moment they downgraded your access without a board vote, possibly earlier. I drove home and I had soup for dinner and I slept better than I had in 2 years. What I want to say here is that I did not feel triumphant. I felt sad. I felt the particular sadness of a man who built something with his hands and his wife and his faith in his own son, and then watched that son look him in the eye and call him a burden. The legal situation was what it was. The machinery would move the way the machinery moved, but none of it changed that Tuesday in October. That folder on the table. That one word. Coasting. I gave my attorney the go-ahead in December. The first letter went to Nathan in early January. His attorney called mine the same afternoon, apparently very agitated. My attorney described him as someone who had not expected to find a floor when he reached for the bottom. Nathan called me the next evening. It was the first time he'd called my personal phone in 3 months. His voice was different, stripped of the careful management I'd been hearing for the past year. He said, "Dad, what is this?" I said it was a shareholder notice. I said he should talk to his attorney. He said, "You're doing this to hurt us." I said I was doing this because his attorney had sent me a buyout offer based on a fraudulent valuation, and because my keycard access to my own building had been revoked without a board resolution, and because someone had told my employees I had memory issues. There was a long silence. He said, "Viveka thought," I said. "I know what Viveka thought." I told him I loved him. I told him that was still true regardless of what came next. Then I said goodnight and I hung up. The following weeks were difficult in the way that legal disputes are always difficult. Slow, expensive, full of documents. But Hargrove had done his work well. The clause was airtight. Nathan's attorney pushed back on the interpretation, then on the execution date of the original agreement, then on a technicality related to the digital signatures on a 2019 amendment. None of it held. By February, Nathan and Viveka understood the situation. The company, the operating entity, the client relationships, the equipment, the building, all of it sat inside a structure they could not access without my cooperation. They could run the day-to-day. They could take their salaries, but they could not sell, refinance, bring in outside investors, or restructure ownership without my signature. Viveka called me once, directly, on a Sunday afternoon. She was controlled, but I could hear something tight underneath it. She said she thought we could work this out like adults. She said Nathan had always respected me. She said she hoped I wasn't going to let an old piece of paper ruin our family. I told her the paper wasn't old. It was exactly as old as my decision to protect what Patricia and I built together. She said, "What do you want?" I said, "I want my parking spot back." She didn't respond to that. What we eventually reached, over 3 months of back and forth, was a formal management agreement. Nathan runs the company. He has real authority over operations, but I am restored as chairman of the board, a role with limited day-to-day involvement but full visibility and a vote on any major structural decision. The buyout offer is gone. A fair valuation process will happen when and if I decide to sell, with an independent assessor, and Viveka's role is defined in writing. She is a consultant, not an officer. Nathan came to my house in April, alone without her. We sat in the kitchen, the same table where I used to help him with homework, and he didn't say much for a while. Then he said he was sorry. He said he'd let himself get convinced of something that wasn't true. He said he knew I wasn't coasting. He said that word had bothered him the moment it was out, and he hadn't known how to take it back. I didn't tell him it was fine because it wasn't fine. And I've lived long enough to know that pretending things are fine doesn't make them so. I told him the truth, that it hurt, that the Tuesday in October in that conference room was one of the worst days of my life since the morning Patricia died. That I needed him to understand that, not just apologize for it. He understood. I think he really did. He asked me if I still had a key to the side entrance. I told him I'd had it the whole time. He laughed. First time I'd heard him laugh in months. It wasn't the big easy laugh he had as a kid. That one might not come back for a while, but it was real. I'll take real. My granddaughter came with him on his next visit. She's 4 years old, and she wanted to see the printing presses, which Nathan had apparently told her about. We drove over on a Saturday morning, and I walked her through the press room, showed her how the rollers moved, let her press one finger against a dry ink pad and stamp her fingerprint on a piece of cardstock. She held it up and studied it very seriously, the way small children study things that are new to them. She asked me if I made this place. I told her grandmother helped. She thought about that for a moment. Then she asked if grandmother was the one in the picture in my kitchen. I said yes. She said she had nice eyes. I didn't trust myself to say anything after that. I just took her hand and we walked back through the press room together, her small fingers in mine, past the east windows where the morning light came through exactly the way it always has. There are things I should have done differently. I should have stayed more involved, not let exhaustion and grief pull me back. I should have had the shareholder agreement reviewed after Patricia died when I first started thinking about transition. I should have trusted my instincts about Viveka earlier. Not as a judgment of her character, but as a signal about where things were heading. What I know now, that I didn't know at 64, is that stepping back is not the same as stepping down. I can take my foot off the accelerator without handing over the wheel. That's a distinction Patricia understood long before I did. She always knew when to hold and when to let go, and the difference between the two. I still go into the office every Tuesday and Thursday. I have my parking spot. I make my coffee in the break room. I walk through the press room and check on things. Not because anyone needs me to, but because those 41 people, and the 38 we're at now, we lost a few through the disruption. Those people are part of something Patricia and I built together, and I intend to see it through as long as I'm able. Viveka doesn't come to the office much anymore. When she does, we are polite. I don't need more than that from her. What I need, I already have. I have my company. I have my son. Imperfectly. The way adults have each other. I have a granddaughter who wanted to know about the printing presses and thought her grandmother had nice eyes. And I have the memory of Hargrove, that meticulous old man, who told me once that the most important clauses in any agreement are the ones you hope you never need. I hope he knew, wherever he is, that I read it. I read every word. I've thought a lot about what Hargrove said to me the day we signed that agreement. He was the kind of man who wore the same style of suit his whole career, spoke slowly, never wasted a word. He told me that the clauses you hope you never need are the ones that define what you actually believed when you were thinking clearly. Not when you were tired. Not when you were grieving. When you were still yourself. I wasn't fully myself in the years after Patricia died. I know that now. Grief doesn't announce itself as confusion. It just quietly loosens your grip on things. And you don't notice how much you've let go until you're standing in a parking lot that used to have your name on it. What I learned from all of this isn't something I could have been told. I had to live it. The first thing is that love and trust are not the same thing, and confusing them is how good people get hurt. I love Nathan. I still do. But love without clear agreements, in business, in family, in anything that involves money and power, is just hope dressed up as a plan. Hope is not a plan. Hargrove knew that. Patricia knew it. I had to lose my parking spot to remember it. The second thing is harder to say out loud. I let exhaustion become an excuse. I told myself I was stepping back out of generosity, out of faith in my son, out of respect for his future. Some of that was true, but some of it was that I was tired and sad, and it was easier to let things slide than to stay sharp and present and difficult when necessary. Difficulty, I've come to understand, is not unkindness. Staying engaged is not controlling. Protecting what you built is not selfishness. I confused all of those things, and the confusion cost me. What brought me back wasn't anger. It wasn't even strategy. It was a night alone in the press room, in the dark, listening to a building that still felt like Patricia. She would not have let me walk away from what we made together. She would have found the box in the basement. She would have read every word. That thought, not bitterness, not revenge, just her voice in my memory saying, "Read it." That's what moved me. Nathan said he was sorry in my kitchen, at the table where he used to do homework. I believe him. I think he got pulled into something that moved faster than his judgment did, and by the time he understood where he'd ended up, he didn't know how to stop. That's a human failing, not a permanent character. People are not their worst decisions, and I'm old enough to know that rebuilding is slower and quieter than breaking, but it's more real. My granddaughter pressed her fingerprint into that ink pad and held up a piece of cardstock and studied it like it contained a secret. 4 years old, perfectly serious. That's the image I keep now, instead of October in the conference room. You get to choose which image you carry. I choose hers. The agreement protected the company. But what I want people to understand is that the agreement wasn't the point. The point was that I had done the work years earlier of thinking clearly about what mattered and writing it down. The protection existed because at some earlier version of myself I had enough integrity and foresight to build it in. Character that you establish in your clear moments will show up for you in your difficult ones. That's not philosophy. That's just what I've seen in 68 years. Build things carefully. Read what you sign. Stay present, even when it's easier not to. And when someone tells you that you're coasting, look them in the eye, say nothing, and go find the fireproof box.